Weekends away, holidays, even a meal out, or any kind of disruption to your routine shouldn't cause a huge surge of anxiety every single time that they come around. And if they do, because your mind starts to worry about the fact that you're going to lose any progress that you've made in relation to your fitness, your health, your weight loss, your weight maintenance, your cardiovascular fitness, your strength, any of that, then this video is for you. Hi, my name's Clara, and I help self-critical gym goers learn how to become more compassionate with themselves so that they stop pressing the fuck it button and stop spiraling between the all or nothing cycles over and over. And in this video, I'm going to specifically talk to you about how to make sure that you don't get fully derailed by any kind of disruption to your ordinary routine, and how to make sure that you don't have to rigidly be constantly in control and insular in your life to make sure that you can continue to make progress in your health and fitness. Now, this is particularly relevant if the thought of taking any sort of time off your normal routine brings a whole bunch of anxiety for you. It's very normal to experience this though, especially when you're used to running a very tight ship. A lot of my clients describe themselves as control freaks, as people who need to kind of have everything under control, be in a routine, that they really kind of need that structure to be able to function. It often means though that when that structural part of that structure is removed, that they do experience a lot of fear in terms of losing the capacity to stay on it, and as a result of that ending up completely off it. And it's a really fine line and an incredibly difficult thing to be tackling, because it is very true that having structure and having routine can be super helpful. However, if you being able to show up in line with your values is fully dependent on every single one of those train tracks being in place and not allowing for any kind of deviation to occur, then you're very dependent on a life that is super controlled. And it's unsurprising that any kind of change would bring a lot of anxiety with it. Now, I want to start by normalizing the fact that that anxiety is there, because a lot of people feel incredibly ashamed about the fact that they can't take any time off, or in noticing that anxiety, it brings up a lot of panic and a lot of sadness for the part of them that maybe can't actually yield into sort of any spontaneous or planned changes in routine. And I think it's really normal to experience that, particularly when the life that you've lived up until this point, perhaps by no fault of your own, has enforced this idea that you can only be on it when everything is perfectly under control, or otherwise, in the absence of that, you're completely off it. And the reason that this keeps happening is because, drumroll please if you've watched any of my videos, you all know this by now, it's because you often don't feel good enough at your core. Now hear me out. I know it might not seem like it's related, but hopefully you will see by the end of this how the two things do interconnect. If you don't feel like you're good enough at your core, it makes sense that you would find tangible things that are going to give you a means to be able to fill that gap in your self-esteem. And in the world that we live in, being able to control your fitness, your nutrition, and the way that your body looks provides a very tangible and accessible way of creating a source of socially validated and reinforced self-esteem sources. Hopefully all of those words make sense together. But because of that, and because you are engaging in the control of your nutrition or your exercise or your body from a place of not feeling good enough, what that's going to do is put you in a position where the goals that you set for yourself in relation to those areas of your life are going to be very perfectionistic. They're going to be very high standard and very rigid in terms of how you plan to approach them, because what is riding on that is escaping that feeling of being not good enough, right? If I don't feel good enough at my core, and I can project myself in my imagination into the future where I am the sort of person who has gone to the gym 5 times a week, hit their 15,000 steps every single day, done cardio every day after a workout, controlled the nutrition, ticked all the boxes with the macros consistently for a long amount of time, I can imagine myself accessing a version of me that I think is going to feel good enough. And now I might not have ever experienced that life, but because of what society tells me and the way that society celebrates people who do or appear to do those things, I can very quickly make that assumption and strive towards being that kind of a person. But because I don't feel good enough at my core, in approaching those goals, I am, instead of trying to move towards being that kind of a person, I'm trying to move away from that feeling of not being good enough. And that presents itself with a very different lived experience. What that often means is that the goals and the way that we set those fitness goals are very rigid, like I said. And when a goal is very rigid, any kind of deviation from that goal is going to give rise to feelings of shame, to reinforcing that feeling of not being good enough. And so as a result of that, it creates a very dependent situation in our lives where, in order to feel good enough, or rather in order to constantly and consistently escape the feeling of not being good enough, we become dependent on having everything under our control and being very strict within our routine and how we engage in that routine, which is why any kind of disruption to that brings about a lot of anxiety, because we experience that fear, or we experience that projection into the future as a situation in which we're not going to have that resource of things that build our self-esteem, and in the absence of those, again, that feeling of not being good enough becomes readily available to us. Not only that, but because in setting very high standard, rigid, perfectionistic goals, and then obviously eventually not being able to meet those goals because they may be like far exceed our current capacity to work towards them consistently, in those situations, the shame that we encounter as a result of not meeting our goals, of falling short, even in the absence of external factors, because that shame is so difficult to contend with, that is often when we press the fuck it button, right? So what that creates is a situation in which somebody who doesn't feel good enough at their core has essentially got an experience of the world in which they must, or they feel like they must hit their fitness goals, or else they will feel like a failure. They have to have everything completely under control, and they become very, very insular in their life, and any kind of disruption to that brings about anxiety, because every time that they disrupt their own consistency, because inevitably they're human, they experience such waves of shame that they end up pressing the fuck it button, because in pressing the fuck it button, it's easy to get rid of feelings of failure because you remove the goal, and therefore you've got nothing to compare yourself against, inevitably then meaning that you don't feel like a failure, because how can you feel that if you don't have a goal, right? It's a means of avoidance, until of course like you re-encounter that feeling of failure when you become observant of the things that you've done that are basically like led you to respail again, and you end up setting those really high standard goals once more. So coming back to the point then of that fear of being derailed by a change in routine, again, a holiday, a weekend away, or a spontaneous meal, or even like a planned meal that isn't within the normal confinements of your structure and your very rigid life. It makes sense that those situations bring about all that anxiety and all that worry, because according to your lived experience, those situations are when you start to feel like a failure. When you feel like a failure, you feel a lot of shame, and to get rid of that shame, you end up pressing the fuck it button. And also in observing yourself not meeting those standards, again, it means that you're going to re-encounter that feeling of not being good enough, which is incredibly difficult and unpleasant and distressing to experience. This rigidity leads to this consistent and pervasive feeling of failure. It leads to a lot of emotional distress. It often leads us to feel really disconnected, and think about what it's cost you up until this point to live a life in which you're not really allowing for any of these deviations from your routine. Maybe you said no to really important life events because you had this fear of failing, you had this fear of pressing the fuck it button, but then you've ended up pressing the fuck it button anyway. Maybe you've gone, maybe it's been so anxiety provoking for you that you've not even been able to connect with the people that you were there to see, or that you were there to spend time with. Or maybe you consistently stay stuck in your own routine, so much so that you never ever end up taking a break. You end up burning out, and when you burn out, you go from being all in to all out, because either you're injured, either you get sick, or either you press the fuck it button so much that you just can't even bring yourself to re-engage in doing the things that you used to find so easy to do before. I'm having to move positions in case the late afternoon sun blinds me and completely ruins the camera, so I'm gonna, fingers crossed, hope that this is still filming okay, and try not to move back and forth so much. But as I was saying before I had to close the blinds, think about what this has cost you. Think about what this mindset, this rigid mindset, this perfectionistic mindset has cost you, and how the fear and that push to like get back on it straight away after a holiday, or the fear that you might struggle to get back on it after a holiday, after a break, has impacted your life. Maybe it's meant that you've gone away on holiday and spent it so wound up because you're trying to like stick really rigidly to your routine in case it breaks, and then you come back and you end up being so burnt out and tired by it that you press the fuck it button anyway. Or maybe the rigid routines that you impose on yourself mean that when you do get a break from them, you're so flipping exhausted by it that you do just go like, you go, oh my god, fuck this shit, I'm done in with my normal routines, I'll get back on it when I'm back home, but now I'm going to make the most of it. And in making the most of it, you tell yourself that you're just going to have the foods that you enjoy, but you have so much of them that it doesn't even become enjoyable. You end up feeling so much worse that again it reinforces this need to get back on it when you return from being away. And all in all, it just creates this horrible hot mess of constantly being a slave to shame, and constantly being trapped in this anxiety loop of being on it or off it, or doing everything that you can to not be off it, and holding on so tightly to being on it that you burn out, and boom, you end up being off it anyway. And I'm not saying this is something that you're selectively choosing to do. I don't think it's your fault. I'm trying not to shame you. I really want you to be able to not judge yourself for this difficulty, because nobody in their right mind wakes up and goes, oh my god, I can't wait to feel super stressed about going away with my family. I can't wait to be mega anxious about a weekend away with my girlfriends or with my mates, whatever that might be. Nobody does that. It's not a choice that we consciously make, it's just an experience that we have. But just because we have that experience and it's not necessarily something that we're choosing to do, and it is quite an automatic thing that comes up, it doesn't mean that we can't do something about it. Unless, of course, you're willing to continue to incur the cost of having this mindset, this rigid fixed mindset that is posing so many stressful difficulties on you and perhaps even on the people around you. And if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, this video is relevant right now because summer is around the corner, as every fitness coach on the internet is going to tell you. And if you don't know how to actually not feel or fear becoming derailed by a holiday, then it is so much more likely that come that time that you get away, come that break that you take, you're going to be super anxious in the lead up to it. You're probably going to set yourself these really high, rigid, unrealistic, unsustainable goals. In the lead up to it, you might be able to stick to those goals for the next 8 to 12 weeks, but you're going to go on holiday, you're going to be panicking before you even go, trying to hold on so tightly to the goals that you've achieved. You're going to get there, it's going to be impossible, you're going to press the fucking button because you don't know how to manage any of the in-betweens, and you don't know how to manage that feeling of failure that you get when you observe yourself not being on point or not being on plan. That you're going to end up binging, not exercising at all, not accessing any of the tools or support that you might have around you in that moment. And it's going to be incredibly difficult then to get back on it when you return, because you're going to feel like a failure, and it's likely that that failure is going to make you feel completely and utterly blocked. And similarly, if you don't know how to be able to be spontaneous right now in the lead up to the summer, it is very likely that even if you are trying to be strict and be good and be on it on a plan, you're going to end up narrowing your life so much so that everything is going to be riding on this one time, this one holiday, this one end outcome. And the pressure that carries means that if anything does go wrong, you're probably going to end up blaming yourself for it, feeling like shit anyway, pressing the fucking button. What's the point? I tried so hard, I still feel like crap, blah blah blah, I'm never going to do this again. It is so unsustainable. If you care about your health and fitness, there has to be a better way for you to approach it, and of course there is, specifically if you work with someone who's qualified to be able to support you with the psychology of managing that discomfort, of not feeling good enough when plans change or when you're not totally in control, i.e. me, and someone who can also help you with the structured plan of how to train, how to eat, how to manage those different emotions while you are away, while you work towards these goals, when you come back from these small disruptions, i.e. me. It's going to be incredibly difficult to be able to actually enjoy the process, the outcome, and see that idea of sustainability and the maintenance of the goals that you work so hard to achieve. So basically what I'm saying is that if you don't want to be derailed by time away, and if you don't want to be afraid of being derailed by having time away from being in control or being on plan, then you need to work with me. You head over to the description, click the link, and drop me a message. Because yes, the solution to breaking out of this very unhelpful mindset is becoming more self-compassionate and more self-accepting. Surprise, surprise, if you've watched any of my other videos, you will probably have known that this was coming. But genuinely, if you build up the feeling of being enough, then that means that even when you set the goals that are important to you in relation to your health and fitness, you're not going to be doing that from a place of not good enoughness, right? If you feel enough at your core, at baseline, then your well-being and your self-esteem isn't as dependent upon you achieving those things in the same kind of perfectionistic way. It means that if you do encounter any kind of failure, you're much better able to contend with it because it's not such a big threat to your self-esteem, to your sense of yourself, to your sense of well-being. It's much easier to tolerate that because it doesn't throw you so much, it doesn't derail you so much, or it doesn't derail you at all. It also means that you're far less likely to feel like you're going to be either on it or off it. It means that you're much better able to notice how moment by moment all behavior makes sense in context, and that being more flexible with the way that you want to eat when you go for a meal out, when you go away for a weekend, when you go on holiday, is actually very appropriate and contextually appropriate and aligned with your values, in the same way that eating and training and moving in a particular way when you're in your normal routine is also contextually appropriate and helpful and relevant, and will continue to move you towards your values without necessarily costing you any kind of joy, any kind of memories, any kind of moments that you might be missing out on by being so rigid and by being so unwilling to let go of those high standards that you set for yourself out of a fear of it derailing you and out of a fear of it leading to you feeling like a failure, not feeling good enough, etc. Ultimately, not being derailed by a meal out or going on holiday or any of these things, it isn't about having more discipline or more willpower or just white knuckling your way through that process and having to be on plan all the time, because that is only going to lead to you combusting, and nobody wants that. It is about having the flexibility, psychologically speaking, and the capacity to be able to sit with those changes, respond to them in a value-informed way, not be so black and white in how you approach health and fitness. And building the tools to do that comes from having more self-compassion and more self-acceptance, which are the two things that are going to lend themselves to that consistency, that contextually appropriate consistency, and that ability to show up moment by moment in ways that bring most amount of fulfillment and joy into your life. So to cut a long story short, if you're feeling nervous at the prospect of going away on holiday and losing the progress or undoing all the progress that you've made over the course of now March until that holiday period comes around, start focusing on your self-compassion and self-acceptance skills. Drop me a message if you need support with that. And as always, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to drop a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel so you don't miss out on the next one. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.